When I was a teenager, babysitting was my go-to gig. It was a way to earn some extra cash and get a taste of responsibility. Plus, I genuinely enjoyed spending time with kids. They have this raw, unfiltered way of seeing the world that I found refreshing. But one babysitting experience when I was 18 left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the line between reality and imagination. It was a gloomy Saturday in late October. The kind of day where the sky was an endless sheet of gray and the rain poured down in steady, relentless sheets. I was scheduled to babysit for a new family that evening, the Parkers. They lived in a charming old house on the edge of town, a place with a large wraparound porch and ivy creeping up the stone walls. The house had character, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a vintage postcard. When I arrived, I was greeted by Mrs. Parker, a warm and friendly woman in her late 30s. She introduced me to her son, Cody, a quiet but polite 6-year-old with a mop of brown hair and big, curious eyes.
Cody.
"Nice to meet you," I said, crouching down to his level. He gave me a shy smile and clutched a toy car in his hand. Mrs. Parker walked me through the evening's plans. "There's not much to it," she said with a smile. "We've left some money for you to order a pizza. Cody's bedtime is at 8, and please, don't let him go into our bedroom." I nodded, taking mental notes. "Got it. Anything else?" She hesitated for a moment, then added, "Cody might mention someone named Agnes. He tends to talk to himself or his imaginary friend when he's playing with his toys. Just so you know, it's normal for him." I assured her it wouldn't be a problem, though her comment piqued my curiosity. With a final wave, Mr. and Mrs. Parker headed out into the rainy evening, leaving Cody and me to our own devices. The rain pounded against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop as we settled into the living room. I found an old episode of a Wipeout show from the early 2000s on TV and let it play for some background noise. Cody spread his toys across the floor, fully immersed in his own little world. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he played. He was murmuring softly, using different voices for his toys. Occasionally, I heard him mention the name Agnes. "Is Agnes your friend?" I asked casually. Cody looked up at me and nodded. "She likes to play with my toys," he said matter-of-factly, then returned to his game. I smiled, charmed by his innocence. Imaginary friends were a common thing among kids, after all. I decided to order the pizza and joined him on the floor, helping to build a makeshift racetrack for his cars. We laughed and played, and for a while, everything was perfectly normal. As we played, one of Cody's toys, a small, cube-like gadget with a crank on the side, caught my attention. It was the kind of toy that simulated a moving racing background on a screen when you pulled the crank down. It seemed to require a bit of effort to operate, yet suddenly, the toy activated on its own. The crank moved down, and the racing background began to whir and spin. I frowned, picking up the toy. "How did this happen, Cody?" Without looking up, he said, "Agnes is playing with it." A chill ran down my spine. It was the way he said it. So nonchalant, so convinced. I tried to shake off the unease, turning the toy off and setting it aside. As the evening wore on, the rain showed no signs of letting up. The pizza arrived, and we ate together at the kitchen table. Cody chattered away about school and his favorite cartoons, his earlier comment about Agnes fading from my mind. After dinner, we returned to the living room. The Wipeout show was still on, and Cody was back to playing with his toys. I settled on the couch, feeling the coziness of the room juxtaposed with the storm raging outside. Around 8 o'clock, I told Cody it was time for bed. He protested a bit, but eventually agreed. I tucked him into bed, read him a story, and sat with him until he fell asleep. The house was quiet, save for the steady drumming of rain on the roof. I decided to tidy up a bit before the Parkers returned. As I was washing up in the bathroom, I heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was Cody needing something, I called out, "Cody, is that you?" There was no answer. I opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway. It was dimly lit, with shadows cast by the flickering light bulb overhead. The hallway stretched out before me, with doors leading to various rooms. At the far end, one of the doors slowly creaked open. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I turned off the bathroom light and cautiously approached the open door. My heart pounded in my chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I peeked inside, expecting to find Cody playing a prank. Instead, I saw him sitting on the bed in the far corner of the room, his wide eyes staring at me. "Cody, what are you doing in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me and said, Agnes pushed open the door. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The room suddenly felt much colder, and the air seemed heavier. I quickly crossed the room, scooped Cody up, and carried him back to the living room. We sat on the couch together, me holding him close as we waited for his parents to return. I didn't mention any of the strange occurrences when Mr. and Mrs. Parker came home. I was too shaken, too unsure of what I had experienced. They thanked me and paid me, and I left as quickly as I could, the cold night air feeling oddly comforting after the unsettling events inside. A few weeks later, Mrs. Parker called to ask if I could babysit Cody again. I hesitated, the memories of that night flooding back. I made up an excuse and declined. I never returned to the Parker house after that. The experience stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. It wasn't just the strange events themselves, but the way Cody talked about Agnes as if she were a real person. It left me wondering about the boundaries between imagination and reality, and whether some things are just beyond our understanding. As I got older, I occasionally heard stories about other families experiencing similar things. Children with imaginary friends who seemed too real, too interactive. It made me think about Cody and wonder if Agnes was still a part of his life, or if she had faded away as he grew older. Hey my friend, if you're into paranormal stories, the weird, and the unexplained, we'd love for you to join our expanding community. Hit the subscribe button and enable notifications to stay tuned for upcoming episodes. If you want to show some love for the channel, simply give us a like. Now, on to story 2. Every summer for 9 years, my friends and I would pack up our bags and head to St. Michael's Catholic Camp, nestled deep in the heart of the Midwest. This camp had been around since the 1930s, and it was steeped in a kind of timeless magic. Between the ages of 7 and 16, this place was my second home. For the most part, my summers were filled with typical camp activities: canoeing, archery, campfire stories, and hikes through the dense forest that seemed to stretch on forever. But it wasn't until my last year there, when I was a junior counselor, that something truly strange happened. Something that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. That final summer was different. The recession had hit hard, and the number of campers dwindled. The once bustling cabins were eerily quiet, and the vibrant energy of the camp felt subdued. As junior counselors, we had more free time than usual. Our responsibilities included organizing activities, supervising younger campers, and, occasionally, cleaning the unused cabins to keep them from gathering dust. It was during one of these cleaning duties that I experienced something I can never forget. One hot July afternoon, another junior counselor, Mike, and I were assigned to clean 2 of the older cabins, Cabin 404 and Cabin 403. Cabin 404, in particular, had a reputation. It was one of the smallest and oldest cabins at the camp, around 80 years old, and there were always rumors floating around about it being haunted. I had never paid much attention to these stories, chalking them up to the vivid imaginations of young campers. But that day, something changed. Mike and I decided to split up to make the job go faster. He took cabin 403, and I headed for cabin 404. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt an inexplicable chill. It was the hottest day of the year, yet the cabin was freezing. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the coolness of the old wood, or maybe a draft from the cracks in the walls. I grabbed a broom and started sweeping the dusty floor. 15 minutes in, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I froze, listening intently, but then brushed it off as just the wind or a small animal. But then, out of nowhere, the two screen doors on either side of the cabin flew open and slammed shut simultaneously. My heart pounded in my chest as I dropped the broom and bolted out of the cabin. Mike, who had been cleaning cabin 403, saw the whole thing and came running over. We decided we needed a break and took off for the mess hall to calm our nerves. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the camp settled into a quiet lull, I was asked to return the broom I had left in cabin 404. Brooms were a high commodity at camp, and we only had so many. Reluctantly, I agreed. One of my best friends at camp, Jenny, decided to come with me. I hadn't told her about the door slamming incident earlier because I knew it would spook her. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way back to the cabin. When we reached cabin 404, we turned on our flashlights and scanned the room for the broom. There it was, standing straight up on its bristles by itself. We exchanged nervous glances just as the broom suddenly fell to the ground. Jenny walked over to pick it up, assuming I had left it like that as a joke. Just as she grabbed it, one of the cabin 404 doors slammed shut again. We both screamed and ran out of there as fast as we could, our hearts racing. We spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what had happened, but deep down, we knew it was something beyond our understanding. The next day, we told the camp director, Mr. Harris, about our experience. He listened patiently but assured us it was probably just the wind. Still, he agreed to check it out with us. When we returned to the cabin with Mr. Harris, everything seemed normal. There was no sign of anything unusual. Despite Mr. Harris's reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something otherworldly had happened in cabin 404. Every time I walked past it for the rest of the summer, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I knew what I had seen and experienced, and I knew it wasn't just my imagination. As the summer drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on my time at St. Michael's Catholic Camp. I had always loved the campfires, the laughter, and the camaraderie, but that last summer had changed something in me. The experience in cabin 404 had opened my eyes to the possibility that there were things in this world beyond our comprehension. Years have passed since that final summer at camp, but the memories remain vivid. I often think about cabin 404 and what might have caused those strange occurrences. Was it really haunted? I may never know for sure, but one thing is certain. That summer taught me that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes, it's those mysteries that make life all the more intriguing. Reflecting on my experiences, I can't help but wonder about the history of cabin 404. The camp had been around since the 1930s, and I often thought about the countless campers and counselors who had passed through its doors. What stories could they tell? Had others experienced the same strange phenomena I had? One night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to do some digging into the history of the camp. I reached out to some of the older camp staff and alumni, hoping to find someone who might know more about cabin 404. After a few days of searching, I managed to get in touch with Mr. Thompson, a former camp director who had worked at St. Michael's for over 30 years before retiring. Mr. Thompson was more than happy to share his memories of the camp. We met at a local diner, and over coffee, he began to recount the history of St. Michael's. He told me about the camp's founding, its growth over the decades, and the many changes it had undergone. When I asked him specifically about cabin 404, he paused for a moment, a thoughtful look on his face. Cabin 404, huh? He said, stirring his coffee. That cabin has always been a bit of an enigma. There have been stories about it for as long as I can remember. Some say it's haunted. Others think it's just the wind and the old wood playing tricks on people. But there's one story that stands out. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as if he were about to share a closely guarded secret. Back in the late 1940s, there was a camper named Emily. She was a sweet girl, loved by everyone, but she had a fragile health. One summer, she fell seriously ill and was put in cabin 404 to be isolated from the other campers. Despite the best efforts of the camp staff and a local doctor, Emily didn't make it. She passed away in that very cabin. I listened intently, chills running down my spine. Do you think her spirit is still there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson sighed. I don't know. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but I can't deny that strange things have happened in that cabin over the years. Doors slamming, cold spots, even sightings of a little girl in old-fashioned clothing. It's hard to say what's real and what's just the power of suggestion. As I left the diner that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to cabin 404 than met the eye. I knew that my experience wasn't unique, and that others had felt the same eerie presence I had. It made me feel a strange sense of connection to the past, to the generations of campers who had come before me. Camping in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is an experience like no other. The untouched beauty of the landscape, the serene lakes, and the towering trees create an atmosphere that feels almost magical. It was late autumn, and the vibrant fall colors had given way to a carpet of dead leaves on the forest floor. My friend Jake and I had chosen a secluded spot, hoping for a quiet weekend away from the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. We arrived at our campsite late in the afternoon, the sun already dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the ground. The air was crisp and cool, with a slight bite that hinted at the coming winter. We set up our tent and built a small fire, the warmth and light a comforting contrast to the encroaching darkness. As night fell, the sounds of the forest came alive. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional snap of a twig. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that seeps into your soul and makes you feel connected to the earth. After a simple dinner cooked over the campfire, we settled into our tent for the night. The tent was small but cozy, with our sleeping bags laid out side by side and our backpacks stashed at the foot. We talked for a while, sharing stories and jokes until sleepiness began to overtake us. Jake was the first to drift off, his steady breathing a soothing background noise as I lay there, staring up at the dark canvas of the tent. It must have been around midnight when I first heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, a rhythmic crunching of leaves that seemed to circle our campsite. At first, I thought it was just an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon, foraging in the night. But as the footsteps continued, I noticed that they never strayed far from our tent. They would approach, circle around, and then retreat slightly before starting the loop again. I nudged Jake awake, whispering, "Do you hear that?" He groaned softly, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" "Listen," I said, my voice barely audible. We both lay still, straining to hear. The footsteps continued, closer now, almost right outside our tent. Jake's eyes widened, and he mouthed, "What is that?" "I don't know," I whispered back, my heart beginning to race. We grabbed our flashlight and, with a silent agreement, decided to confront whatever was out there. Jake unzipped the tent flap slowly, the sound loud in the quiet night. He shone the flashlight into the darkness, sweeping it back and forth. The beam of light cut through the blackness, illuminating the trees and the ground covered in dead leaves. But there was nothing there. No animal, no person, not even a disturbance in the leaves. We waited a few moments, listening intently. The footsteps had stopped as soon as we opened the tent, and now there was only silence. After a few minutes, we retreated back into the tent, zipping it closed and turning off the flashlight. We lay there in the dark, hearts pounding, waiting. It didn't take long for the footsteps to start up again, this time even closer. They seemed to come from right beside the tent, the sound clear and distinct. Jake and I exchanged nervous glances, our previous bravado fading quickly. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. I thought for a moment. Let's just stay quiet and see if we can figure out what it is. We lay there, motionless, listening to the slow, methodical crunch of leaves. It was unnerving, the sound too deliberate to be an animal. My mind raced with possibilities. A lost hiker, a prankster, something more sinister. The not knowing was the worst part, the uncertainty gnawing at my nerves. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence was almost deafening, the tension in the tent palpable. Then, faintly, I heard a humming sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew steadily louder. It was a melodic tune, eerie and unrecognizable, like a lullaby from another world. Jake and I exchanged wide-eyed glances, our fear mingling with curiosity. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking, "but we need to find out." I slowly unzipped a small section of the tent, just enough to peek out. The night was pitch black, the moon hidden behind a thick layer of clouds. I strained my eyes, trying to see anything in the darkness. And then I saw it, a soft, phosphorescent glow hovering a few feet from our tent. It was formless, a floating cloud of light that gently pulsated with an otherworldly rhythm. The footsteps and the humming seemed to emanate from this glowing entity. I blinked several times, not trusting my eyes. "Jake, look at this," I whispered, motioning for him to take a look. He peered through the opening, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What is that?" "I have no idea," I replied, "but we need to find out." We decided to follow the glow, curiosity now outweighing our fear. We slowly unzipped the tent, careful not to make any noise, and stepped out into the cold night. The glow drifted away from our campsite, moving towards the dense forest. We followed at a safe distance, our footsteps crunching softly on the dry leaves. The glowing entity led us deeper into the forest, weaving through the twisted trees and overgrown underbrush. The air grew colder, and the silence was punctuated only by the soft humming and the crunch of leaves under our feet. We kept our flashlight off, relying on the glow to guide us. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an ancient-looking stone circle, moss-covered and time-worn. The glow settled in the center of the circle, illuminating a figure that had been standing there, cloaked in shadow. The figure was hooded and cloaked, its face obscured by darkness. It stood perfectly still, like a statue, the glow casting an eerie light around it. My heart raced as I tried to find words, but they escaped me. The figure began to move, its movements slow and deliberate. It raised an arm, pointing towards the edge of the clearing. I turned to see what it was pointing at and noticed another group of figures emerging from the trees. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, and they moved with a purpose, surrounding the stone circle. Jake and I found ourselves caught in the middle of a standoff between the hooded figure and the newcomers. We had no idea what was happening or what our role was in this strange gathering. Fear and confusion gripped us as we slowly backed away, our eyes darting between the two groups. As we edged back into the forest, the figures seemed to ignore us, their focus entirely on each other. We took this opportunity to turn and run, our feet pounding on the forest floor as we made our way back to our campsite. We didn't stop until we reached our tent, breathless and shaken. We quickly packed up our belongings, our hands trembling with adrenaline. The only thought in our minds was to get out of there as quickly as possible. We threw everything into our backpacks, barely taking the time to organize anything, and started the trek back to our car. The hike back felt longer than it had earlier, the forest now filled with shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at us. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump, our nerves frayed and on edge. We kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see the glowing figure or the hooded man following us. When we finally reached our car, we threw our gear into the trunk and jumped in, locking the doors behind us. Jake started the engine, and we sped off, the tires kicking up gravel as we left the campsite far behind. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. We found a small diner that was open late and decided to stop for coffee, both of us needing something to calm our nerves. As we sat there, the events of the night replayed in our minds, the fear slowly giving way to a sense of disbelief. What the hell just happened? Jake asked, his hands shaking as he held his coffee cup. I don't know, I replied, my voice still trembling, but I don't think we should ever go back there. We agreed to keep the events of the night to ourselves, not wanting to be ridiculed or dismissed as crazy. But the memory of that night stayed with us, a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the dark corners of the world. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glowing figure and the hooded man, their presence lingering in my mind. I found myself researching ancient stone circles and mysterious glowing entities, trying to make sense of what we had seen. But the more I read, the more questions I had, and the answers seemed to slip further away. I often wondered what would have happened if we had stayed in the clearing, if we had tried to communicate with the figures or understand their purpose. But the fear of the unknown had driven us away, and now we were left with only our imaginations to fill in the gaps. Years later, the memory of that night is still vivid. Jake and I have talked about it many times, each of us trying to piece together the puzzle of what happened. We've shared our story with a few close friends, but the reactions are always the same: skepticism and disbelief. But we know what we saw, and the fear we felt was real. It's a reminder that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes those mysteries are best left unexplored. There are secrets hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves, and not all of them are meant to be understood. So, if you ever find yourself camping in a secluded spot, far from the safety of the familiar, remember our story. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and be prepared for the unexpected. Because sometimes, the unknown is closer than you think, lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight, waiting to make itself known. I had always prided myself on being a rational, no-nonsense kind of person. Ghost stories were just that, stories. But the events that unfolded when I started my new job made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It all started when my best friend, Kevin, helped me get a job at a large retail store. Kevin had been working there for about a year, and had nothing but good things to say about it, especially the overnight shifts. He didn't give me much detail about what to expect, just that the job was easy and the pay was decent. I trusted him completely and was excited to start. The store was your typical big box retailer, with wide aisles, high shelves stacked with merchandise, and a distinct hum of fluorescent lights that seemed to buzz louder at night. It was located on the outskirts of our suburban town, far enough from the city to feel a bit isolated, but close enough to draw a steady stream of customers during the day. On my first night, Kevin and I arrived just before midnight. The parking lot was eerily empty, illuminated by a few flickering streetlights. We walked in through the employee entrance at the back, where the night shift crew was gathering for the nightly briefing. There were about 6 of us that night, all dressed in the store's uniform. A navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants. "All right, everyone," our shift supervisor, Karen, began. "We've got a truck delivery tonight, so let's get those pallets unloaded and the stock shelved. Brian, since you're new, I'm assigning you to aisles 8 and 9. They're pretty straightforward, so you should be fine. Kevin will be in aisle 10 if you need any help." I nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. Kevin gave me a thumbs up and a reassuring smile as we headed into the store. The store at night was a completely different world. The absence of customers created an almost cathedral-like silence, broken only by the occasional clattering of a shopping cart or the beeping of the pallet jack. The aisles seemed longer, stretching into shadows that the overhead lights couldn't quite reach. There was something peaceful yet unsettling about it. As I started stocking the shelves in aisle 8, I quickly got into a rhythm. The repetitive task of unboxing items and placing them on the shelves was oddly calming. I was just beginning to feel comfortable in my new role when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A black shadow or mass darted quickly across the end of the aisle. I paused, my heart racing a bit. It had moved towards a dead-end section where there shouldn't have been anyone. I brushed it off, thinking it must have been Kevin, since he was working in the adjacent aisle. I continued my work, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to aisle 10. There was Kevin, sitting on the floor, organizing items on the bottom shelves. "Hey, Kev, did you just walk by a few minutes ago?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up, puzzled. "No, I've been here the whole time." "Why?" I hesitated, unsure if I should mention what I saw. I thought I saw something, or someone, a shadow or something, moving really fast down the aisle. Kevin's expression changed subtly, a knowing look crossing his face. "Yeah, I've seen those too. Didn't want to tell you and freak you out. Figured you'd experience it yourself sooner or later." He went on to explain that he frequently saw shadows out of the corner of his eye, but whenever he turned to look, they were gone. It was like a fleeting glimpse of something just beyond perception. Over the next few months, I settled into the routine of the overnight shift. On delivery nights, the store buzzed with activity as we worked together to unload and stock the new inventory. On other nights, there were fewer of us, and the silence could be almost oppressive. It was during these quieter nights that the strange occurrences seemed more frequent. One night, a new employee, Jessica, joined our team. She was assigned to work in aisle 14, at the very back of the store. During our break, she came over, looking visibly shaken. "I saw something weird earlier," she said, glancing nervously around the break room. "A shadow, like a person, but when I looked, there was no one there." Kevin and I exchanged glances. We had deliberately not mentioned the shadows to any new hires, not wanting to influence their experiences. It was unsettling to hear that Jessica had seen the same thing. The eerie incidents didn't stop at shadows. One morning, Around 6 a.m., Kevin and I were finishing our duties, getting ready for the morning shift to take over. We were talking about the strange things we'd experienced, the shadows, the footsteps, the weird noises, when suddenly, a loud slap echoed through the store. A loaf of bread flew off the shelf a few feet from us. We both stared in shock, barely able to believe what we had just seen. We walked over, picked up the bread, and tried to recreate the incident. We banged on the side of the shelf, hit the bottom, but nothing caused the bread to fly off like that. Then I slapped my hand on a plastic bag, and it made the same sound we had heard. It was as if the bread had been smacked with force off the shelf. As we stood there, trying to make sense of it, the doorknob to the office behind us started rattling rapidly. It lasted only a few seconds before stopping abruptly, just as the front doors opened and the morning manager arrived. Another time, just before midnight, I was walking towards the restroom when I saw Laura, one of the cashiers, hurrying towards me. She looked pale and scared. "Did you knock on the bathroom door?" she asked urgently.
No, i ràplia, confusa.
I was coming from the office. Why? I heard 3 loud bangs while I was in there, she said, her voice trembling, but there was no one else around. I assured her it wasn't me or anyone else from our team. She hurried past me, and I later found out from Kevin that she had asked to see the security footage. When they reviewed it, they saw her entering the bathroom, followed by a minute of static on the screen. When the footage resumed, she was seen hurrying out, just as she had described. One particularly creepy night, we were experiencing power issues, and the lights were dim throughout the store. The dim lighting made everything look sinister, especially the back aisles. I was assigned to aisle 16, which I dreaded because it always had a creepy vibe, even more so with the poor lighting. Around 2 a.m., Kevin came to get me for our lunch break. As we were talking and cleaning up, we heard a rattling noise from aisle 15, followed by a low growl. We both froze, our eyes wide with fear. We gasped, exchanged a horrified look, and ran towards the front of the store. We passed by another coworker, Mark, who asked what happened. When we told him, he revealed that earlier that night, while getting supplies in aisle 12, he felt like he had been pushed to the floor and heard a laugh. He hadn't told us because he thought we wouldn't believe him. The 3 of us went to the office to check the security cameras. What we saw sent chills down our spines. In the footage, we saw a shadowy mass crawling sideways along the shelves, like something out of a horror movie. We stayed together for the rest of the night, too scared to be alone. The most terrifying incident happened one night when we were in the basement, putting away stock. The basement was old, with creaky stairs and a damp, musty smell. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows. As we were talking and laughing, trying to keep our spirits up, we suddenly heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. The sound was slow and deliberate, like someone wearing heavy boots. We all fell silent, staring at the staircase as the footsteps grew closer and closer, stopping just before the last step. We cautiously walked over and peeked around the corner. No one was there. We searched the entire basement but found nothing. We were the only ones in the store that night, and the doors were all locked. I don't work at that store anymore. From what I've heard, they eventually did away with the overnight shift entirely. No one wanted to work it. The strange, unexplained events became too much for everyone. Looking back, I still can't explain what happened during those nights. The rational part of me wants to believe there's a logical explanation for everything, but the experiences I had at that store have left me questioning what I thought I knew. Maybe some things are beyond our understanding, lingering in the shadows just out of sight, waiting to be discovered. This past June, my friend Dexter, my little sister Lucy, and I embarked on a long weekend camping trip to a popular state park a few hours away from our bustling city life. The state park was known for its beautiful scenery, diverse wildlife, and miles of hiking trails. We were eager to leave behind our everyday routines and immerse ourselves in nature. I had meticulously planned a variety of fun activities, including hiking, fishing, and a visit to a ghost town I had stumbled upon while mapping our trip. The ghost town intrigued me, mainly because I could find very little information about it online. The mystery surrounding it made the idea of visiting all the more exciting. We arrived at the park early on a Friday morning. The sun was shining, and the sky was a brilliant blue. After setting up our campsite, which was nestled in a quiet, wooded area with a clear view of a nearby lake, we decided to start our adventure by visiting the ghost town. We loaded our gear into my trusty old truck, a rugged vehicle that had seen its fair share of off-road adventures, and set the coordinates into the GPS. The drive began pleasantly enough. We chatted animatedly, our excitement palpable as we speculated about what we might find. The two-lane mountain road wound its way up into the hills, the trees growing denser as we climbed. The higher we went, the more the sun was blocked out by the thick canopy of leaves overhead, casting the road into an eerie twilight. As we continued, the road narrowed, eventually becoming a one-lane path. Civilization seemed to fall away behind us, the distance between any signs of human life growing until there were none. Dexter, who was usually quite laid back, started to express his concerns. "Are you sure about this? We have Lucy with us, and this is getting pretty remote," he said, glancing back at my sister, who was staring out the window, wide-eyed but excited. "I know, Dex, but we're almost there," I replied, trying to sound confident despite the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. The road had transformed from a paved lane to a much slimmer gravel path that barely fit our truck. I couldn't help but think about what would happen if another vehicle came from the opposite direction. There were no guardrails, and the drop-off along the mountain cliff was sheer and terrifying. Our excitement began to wane, replaced by a thick layer of concern. The drive was taking much longer than anticipated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a stop sign at the end of the gravel road. The dense trees abruptly gave way to a bright, sunlit clearing, and the road widened into a two-lane stretch once again. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief, even though there were still no signs of human life. The GPS instructed us to take the next right, and as we turned off the main road, we were once again on a one-lane gravel path. Ahead, we could see the ghost town. The old, weathered gray buildings stood silent and still, a stark contrast to the vibrant greenery surrounding them. We parked the truck and got out, taking in the sight. It was both eerie and fascinating. We had brought along our two dogs, a large chocolate lab named Max and a feisty Australian shepherd named Bella. The dogs were immediately on high alert, pulling at their leashes and sniffing the air. Bella's hackles went up, a clear sign that she sensed something unusual. As we explored the main road of the ghost town, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The town consisted of several old buildings, some standing tall while others had caved in over the years. I snapped a few photos, trying to capture the eerie beauty of the place. One house, in particular, caught my attention. It was much newer than the others, and it looked as though someone might actually live there. The front door was ajar, and I thought I saw movement inside. "Do you think someone lives there?" Lucy asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. "I don't know," I replied, "but it looks like it. Maybe it's the caretaker of the ghost town." We walked past the house and a creepy, broken swing set that swayed slightly in the breeze, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the ghost town, the streets lined with old, gray buildings, I felt an increasing sense of unease. Dexter was busy taking photos of the interiors of some of the buildings, his curiosity piqued by what might be inside. "I don't want to go any further," I told Dexter. "Even though we're both armed, I don't feel safe here with Lucy." Dexter looked at me, sensing my growing discomfort. "All right, let's head back," he said, and we began making our way back to the truck. As we passed the newer house again, I noticed the front door was now closed. Lucy pointed it out, and Bella went berserk. She lunged towards the house, snarling and growling, making sounds I had never heard from her before. Max was on high alert too, his hackles up as he darted his eyes between the house and the rest of the town. We hurriedly climbed back into the truck, deciding to find a different route back rather than the treacherous path we had come in on. As we drove away, the tension in the truck was palpable. We were all relieved to be leaving, but the unease lingered. Later that evening, after we had settled back at our campsite and tucked Lucy into her bed in the camper, Dexter and I sat by the fire, going over the photos we had taken. As Dexter scrolled through his shots, his expression changed from one of amusement to one of fear. He began zooming in on the photos, his face growing paler with each one. Finally, he handed the phone to me, his hands trembling. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding as I took the phone from him. "Look at the windows," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the photos and felt a chill run down my spine. In the windows of the old buildings, there were figures, short, light gray creatures with large heads and black eyes. On their foreheads and the sides of their heads were small nubs, possibly horns. One of them appeared to have wings lined with the same nubs. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. These were not human. As I scrolled through the photos, my thoughts kept returning to what could have happened. We had Lucy with us, and it could have been disastrous if these creatures had decided to confront us. We were lucky they stayed hidden inside the old buildings and didn't bother us. "Who do you think was in the newer house?" I asked Dexter, my voice shaking. "I don't know," he replied. "Maybe it was one of those creatures, or maybe it was a human living among them. Either way, I'm glad we didn't find out." We sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound. The questions in my mind seemed endless. Who or what were those creatures? Was the person in the newer house aware of them, or were they a prisoner in their own home? Had we unknowingly stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple ghost town? I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back to that place. The risk was too great, and the fear too real. I didn't want to be responsible for anyone getting hurt or worse. As the fire died down and we prepared to turn in for the night, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. We had escaped unscathed, but the memories of what we had seen would stay with us forever. The ghost town was a place of mystery and danger, a reminder that sometimes the things we can't see are the ones we should fear the most. The next morning, we packed up our campsite and headed home, eager to put the ghost town behind us. The drive back was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. Lucy slept in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the danger we had faced. Dexter and I exchanged glances, knowing that the experience had changed us both. Once home, life slowly returned to normal. The hustle and bustle of daily routines helped to push the memories of the ghost town to the back of our minds. But every now and then, something would trigger a flashback. A particular sound, a shadow in the corner of my eye, the sight of an old, weathered building. The fear would return, as fresh as the day it happened. I never shared the location of the ghost town with anyone, I didn't want to be responsible for leading others into potential danger. The mystery of the creatures and the person in the newer house remained unsolved, and I was content to leave it that way. Looking back, I realize how lucky we were. Our curiosity had led us to a place we were not prepared for, a place that held secrets beyond our understanding. The experience taught me to trust my instincts and to be cautious of the unknown. Some mysteries are better left unexplored, and some places are best left undisturbed. As I sit here, recounting this story, I hope it serves as a warning to others. The world is full of wonders and adventures, but it is also full of dangers. Be curious, but be careful, and always trust your instincts, for they might just save your life. I've always considered myself a rational person, someone who relies on logic and facts to navigate life. Ghost stories and supernatural tales were amusing, but never something I took seriously. However, a series of events in my childhood home challenged my skepticism and left me with a lingering sense of wonder and unease. This is the story of how I went from a non-believer to someone who had to accept that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. It all began when I was about 2 years old, and my family moved into a large, old house in a small village in the United States. The house was a relic from the late 1800s, with thick stone walls that were nearly 2 feet wide. It had a kind of charm that comes with age, but also an aura of mystery. The wooden floors creaked with every step, and the air was always a bit musty, no matter how much we cleaned. My older sister, Emma, was 5 at the time, and like any kids our age, we were excited to explore our new home. The property was expansive, with a large garden at the back, perfect for playing. At the edge of the garden were stacks of firewood, neatly arranged to dry. These piles were about 6 feet high and extended for about 15 feet, creating an imposing wall of logs. Our father often reminded us to be careful around them, but they became a favorite spot for our games of hide and seek. One warm summer day, in late July or early August, Emma and I were outside, enjoying the sun. The sky was a brilliant blue, with only a few fluffy clouds drifting lazily. We had been running around, chasing each other, when I decided to go inside to grab us some lemonade. Emma stayed behind, wandering near the firewood stacks, lost in her own world. As I returned, I saw Emma standing still, her face a mix of confusion and fear. I hurried over, my young mind immediately thinking she might have hurt herself. "Emma, are you okay?" I asked, concerned. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "I saw something," she whispered. "A head, peeking over the firewood. It moved along the top and then disappeared." I frowned. "Are you sure? Maybe it was Dad trying to scare you?" Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, it wasn't him. I followed it, but when I got to the end of the woodpile, there was nobody there. And then I felt this intense cold. It's so hot today, but it was freezing. Our dad had been inside with our mom the entire time, and the garden was fenced off, making it highly unlikely that anyone else could have sneaked in. Still, being the skeptic I was, I dismissed it as Emma's overactive imagination. We continued our play, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something strange had happened. As the years went by, Emma continued to experience odd occurrences. She would often tell us about seeing people who weren't there, hearing scratching noises at night, or the creaking of floorboards as if someone was walking around. I always shrugged it off, attributing it to the quirks of an old house or Emma's vivid imagination. Our mother, however, had her own encounters, especially at night. My dad worked the night shift, so it was often just us and our loyal German shepherd, Max, who was fiercely protective and made us feel safe. One particular incident my mom shared with me years later stands out. It was a quiet night, and as usual, my dad was at work. Mom was in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, when Max started barking furiously. This wasn't uncommon, as he sometimes barked at small animals outside, but it was enough to wake her up. Already awake, she decided to get a glass of water. As she got out of bed, she noticed a dark shadow creeping into the master bedroom from the hallway. At first, she thought it was just her sleepy mind playing tricks on her. But as the shadow moved, it started to lift itself from the wall and floor, floating in the middle of the room. It was an amorphous black mass, resembling the silhouette of a large stingray with a featureless head at the center. It began to move towards her, reaching out with fin-like appendages. Paralyzed with fear, she couldn't move or scream. Just as it seemed about to touch her, the apparition vanished into thin air. She remained frozen in place for several minutes, her heart pounding, before finally crawling back under the blankets. She didn't get her glass of water that night. Despite these unsettling experiences, I remained a skeptic. I never saw or heard anything myself, so it was easy to dismiss the stories as overactive imaginations or the quirks of an old house. But my perspective began to change after my grandmother passed away in 2021. My grandmother was a remarkable woman, full of life and wisdom. Her passing was a huge loss for our family, and we gathered at our childhood home to grieve and remember her. After the funeral, we sat together, sharing stories and memories. The house felt different that day, more somber, but also filled with a sense of her presence. As the evening wore on, the phone suddenly started ringing violently. It was one of those cordless phones in a base station, and the sound it made was not a normal ring but a rapid series of rings, something I had never heard before. My mom answered it, but there was only static on the other end. When she checked, there was no incoming call registered. It was bizarre and unsettling. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the blanket being slowly pulled off my shoulder. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I felt a warm hand gently rest on my shoulder. I knew I was alone in the room. The door was closed, and everyone else was asleep. Despite the strangeness of the situation, I didn't feel scared. Instead, I felt a profound sense of comfort and peace. Deep down, I knew it was my grandmother, saying her final goodbye. Over the years, I've had time to reflect on these experiences. The house we lived in had a history, one that we may never fully understand. The thick stone walls and creaky floors held secrets that we were only beginning to uncover. My sister's encounters, my mother's terrifying night, and my own experience with the phone and the blanket all pointed to something beyond the ordinary. I've come to accept that there are things in this world that defy explanation, events that challenge our understanding of reality. My grandmother's stories, once just entertaining tales, now hold a deeper meaning for me. They are reminders that the world is filled with mysteries, some of which we may never solve. Today, I approach life with a sense of wonder and curiosity, always open to the possibility that there is more to this world than meets the eye. And as I share my story, I hope to inspire others to embrace the unknown, to be open to the mysteries that surround us, and to find beauty in the unexplained. The memory of our old house remains vivid in my mind. The garden with its towering stacks of firewood, the cozy yet eerie rooms, and the feeling of being watched. All these elements combined to create an atmosphere that was both enchanting and unsettling. It was a place where the past and present seemed to converge, where the veil between the known and the unknown was thin. As I walk through life now, I carry these experiences with me. They have shaped who I am and how I see the world. They remind me that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we cannot explain, the ones that lie just beyond the reach of our understanding. This was a horrifying experience that I can't explain. I've always been a skeptic, someone who needed concrete evidence before believing in anything out of the ordinary. But this particular event has left me confused for many years. Despite my skepticism, I experienced something so strange that it still haunts me to this day. It all began when I was about 10 years old, back in middle school. My best friend, Jay, would come over to my house every Saturday to hang out. We lived in a small, quiet town in rural Ohio. Our house was a typical two-story suburban home with a large backyard that bordered a dense forest. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the air always smelled fresh, with a hint of pine and earth. Jay and I were always pretty observant of our surroundings, so whenever something unusual happened, we were quick to point it out to each other. At that time, my younger sister had this small, realistic baby doll that could crawl on all fours if it had batteries. It was one of those toys that looked cute to some people, but always struck me as a bit creepy, especially with its blinking eyes. It hadn't been played with in years, and it usually just sat in a corner of the playroom, gathering dust. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Jay and I were hanging out in the playroom. The playroom was on the first floor, filled with an array of toys, a few beanbags, and shelves packed with books and games. The sunlight streamed in through the large window, casting a warm glow on the toys scattered around. We were busy playing a board game when we noticed something odd. The doll was positioned right in the center of the room. I vaguely recalled seeing it there, but thought it strange since my sister hadn't touched it in ages. I picked it up and threw it towards the toy crate, watching it bounce off the wall before landing on a pile of stuffed animals. We shrugged it off and decided to go outside to enjoy the nice weather. Our backyard was our personal adventure land, a sprawling expanse of green bordered by the forest. We spent a good hour playing basketball, climbing trees, and running around. It was one of those perfect childhood afternoons filled with laughter and boundless energy. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, we decided to head back inside. As soon as we stepped into the hallway leading to the playroom, Jay froze. His eyes were wide with shock, staring down the hallway. I followed his gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. There, crawling slowly towards us, was the doll. It moved in a jerky, unnatural manner, its old joints making soft, clicking noises with each movement. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. Our first thought was that my sister was playing a prank on us. It seemed like the most logical explanation, but when we called out her name, there was no response. We grabbed the doll, which let out a mechanical cry, and began searching the house for her. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with confusion. How could the doll be moving? It shouldn't have been able to work without fresh batteries, and I knew for a fact that the ones inside it were old and corroded. We checked every room, calling her name, but found nothing. Eventually, we discovered her sound asleep in her bedroom, completely unaware of what was happening. I felt a mix of relief and growing unease. If it wasn't her, then who or what was moving the doll? We decided to bury the doll under a pile of toys in the playroom, hoping to avoid any further creepy incidents. For a few weeks, everything seemed normal. Jay and I continued our regular weekend routines, almost forgetting about the strange event. Then, one weekend, something even more unsettling happened. We were sitting at the dining room table, chatting and sipping sodas. The dining room was adjacent to the living room, which had two large bookshelves filled with all sorts of knickknacks and books. As I was talking, Jay suddenly spit his drink all over the table. I was about to laugh, thinking he had choked on his soda, but the terrified look on his face stopped me. He pointed behind me, unable to speak. I turned slowly, dread building up inside me. There, perched on top of one of the tall bookshelves, was the doll. It was facing us, its unblinking eyes seemingly fixed on us. My mind raced. How could it have gotten up there? Neither Jay nor I could have reached that high without a ladder. It made no sense. We ran outside to find my mom, who was tending to the garden. I was almost out of breath as I asked her if she had moved the doll. She looked genuinely confused and said she had no idea what we were talking about. The fear in her eyes told me she wasn't lying or playing a prank on us. My mom was a practical woman, not one to mess around with creepy dolls, especially not to scare her own kids. At that point, Jay and I were freaking out. We were convinced there was something very wrong with that doll. We asked my mom to get it down for us. Once she did, we took it far outside to the garbage cans by the edge of our property and threw it away, hoping that would be the end of it. For a few weeks, it seemed like our problem was solved. We resumed our usual activities, playing in the backyard, watching movies, and generally enjoying our weekends. The memory of the doll began to fade, replaced by the normalcy of our everyday lives. Then one morning, everything changed again. It was a Saturday, and Jay wasn't over yet. I woke up early and headed to the kitchen to grab some breakfast. Our kitchen had a glass door that led out to the front porch. As I approached the door, I froze in my tracks. Outside, halfway down the walkway leading to the glass doors, was the doll. It was positioned as though it had been crawling towards the house, its face pressed against the ground. Panic surged through me. How could it be here? We had thrown it away weeks ago. My mind raced with possible explanations, but none made sense. I called for my mom, trying to keep my voice steady. When she saw the doll, her face went pale. She immediately went outside, picked it up, and said she would take care of it. I trusted her, but the whole situation left me feeling deeply unsettled. Later, I asked her what she had done with the doll. She told me she had waited for it to dry, then burned it and tossed the remains in the garbage bin. That seemed final enough, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Jay and I never had any more strange experiences with the doll, but the memory of those events lingered. To this day, I still wonder what could have possibly caused those incidents. None of my family members would have pranked us like that, and it didn't make sense for anyone else to be involved. Despite my skepticism, this experience remains one of the few things in my life that I just can't explain. As an adult, I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a series of coincidences, or perhaps there was some logical explanation that I just haven't figured out yet. But every time I think back to those moments, the doll crawling down the hallway, sitting atop the bookshelf, and lying on the walkway, I can't shake the feeling that something truly inexplicable occurred. Now, whenever I see a doll, a chill runs down my spine. It's a reminder of that strange time in my childhood, a time when the lines between reality and the supernatural seem to blur. While I remain a skeptic, this experience has left a mark on me, a lingering question that may never be answered. And so, I share this story not just to entertain, but to perhaps connect with others who have had similarly unexplainable experiences. Life is full of mysteries, and sometimes, the most we can do is acknowledge them and move forward, forever changed by the things we cannot fully understand. It's a great fishing spot, very secluded. It's a little dam on the Merced River. Most of the time when my friend and I went there to fish, there was no one else but us. No wonder the bluegills there are as big as tilapia. Nobody really goes there to fish, I guess. One early morning, I decided to go fishing there alone. At that time, my wife and I were still living in Sonora, California. The drive from Sonora to this fishing spot is about 30 minutes. When I got there in the early morning, it just felt weird. I kept feeling like someone was watching me even though I didn't see anyone around but me. The river was serene, the kind of calm that usually soothes my mind. But that day, it felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a strange stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to my imagination. After all, it was early, and I hadn't had my coffee yet. I set up my gear and started casting my line. The fish were biting, and within the first hour, I had a couple of nice-sized bluegills. But that eerie feeling persisted. Every time I glanced around, expecting to see someone, there was nothing. Just the trees swaying gently in the breeze and the water flowing steadily past. About an hour into my fishing, I noticed a faint smell of perfume. It was subtle at first, like a whiff carried by the wind. I figured maybe someone else had arrived, though I hadn't heard any cars or footsteps. The smell followed me as I moved along the riverbank, trying different spots. It was an odd scent for the outdoors, a floral aroma that seemed out of place in the middle of nowhere. As the morning wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. After about 2 hours, I decided I'd had enough. The fish were great, but the unsettling atmosphere was getting to me. I packed up my gear and headed back to my car, constantly glancing over my shoulder. When I got home, the first thing I did was take a shower. I hoped the hot water would wash away the lingering unease. After that, I felt a bit better, so I decided to take a nap on the couch. My wife was sitting there, watching TV. She had a day off but was scheduled to work at 2 p.m. I lay down with my head resting against her left leg, feeling comforted by her presence. The steady hum of the TV and the warmth of her leg lulled me into a deep sleep. I woke up later, feeling groggy. The first thing I noticed was that my wife was still sitting there, her eyes glued to the TV. I glanced at the screen and saw that Final Destination was on. I reached for my phone to check the time and saw it was already 2:30 p.m. Confused, I looked up at my wife and asked, "Babe, why aren't you at work?" She didn't answer me. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. When I looked up again, she was gone. The couch was empty. Panic set in as I stood up and looked around the house. I called out for her, but there was no response. I checked the bedroom, the kitchen, and even the bathroom, but she wasn't there. I went to the window and saw that her car was gone. Feeling a bit foolish, I texted her to ask if she was at work. A few minutes later, she replied, saying she had left while I was still sleeping on the couch. I told her what had happened, about seeing her on the couch even after she had left. She brushed it off, saying I must have been dreaming. Later, I called my mom and told her about the strange experience. She listened quietly before saying, "Something might have followed you home from that fishing spot." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but there was something about that day that felt off, something I couldn't quite explain. Not long after that, my friend and his father went fishing at the same spot. On their way back, they stopped at a restroom by some trees. His father went inside and saw a lady with dirty blonde hair, wearing an old, dirty white dress, just staring at the wall. He pretended not to see her, quickly washed his hands, and left. When he told us about it, I felt a sense of validation mixed with a deeper unease. There was definitely something strange about that place. Despite everything, I still go fishing there. The fish are just too good to pass up. But now, every time I go, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone. There's a reason why the fish there are so big. and it might have something to do with whatever, or whoever, is lurking around that secluded spot. I remember one particular morning vividly. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale, golden light over the landscape. The river was cloaked in mist, giving it an ethereal quality. As I set up my gear, the perfume smell returned, stronger than before. It wrapped around me like an invisible cloak, its floral scent mingling with the earthy aroma of the riverbank. The feeling of being watched was even more pronounced. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from tree to tree, but saw nothing. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish or the rustling of leaves. I tried to focus on fishing, but my mind kept wandering back to the strange occurrences. After a couple of hours, I decided to call it a day. As I packed up my gear, I felt a sudden chill, as if a cold breeze had blown through, but the air was still. I hurried back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I told my wife about the strange experiences, but she was skeptical. "Maybe it's just your imagination," she suggested. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A few days later, I received a call from my friend. He and his father had gone back to the fishing spot. This time, his father had a more disturbing encounter. While using the restroom, he saw the same lady with dirty blonde hair and the old white dress. This time, she turned to look at him, her eyes vacant and unblinking. He quickly left, shaken by the encounter. My friend's father wasn't the kind of man to scare easily, but the look in his eyes when he told me the story was one of pure fear. It was then that I realized there was something truly unsettling about that place. Over the next few months, I couldn't stop thinking about the fishing spot and the strange occurrences. I did some research, hoping to find some explanation. I discovered that the area had a dark history. Decades ago, a woman had drowned in the river under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was an accident, while others believed it was foul play. Her body was found near the spot where we fished, and since then, there had been reports of strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. The more I learned, the more uneasy I felt. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the stories and my experiences were hard to ignore. I decided to take a break from fishing at that spot, hoping some distance would help me clear my head. One day, as I was walking through a local market, I saw an old man selling handmade wooden charms. He claimed they were for protection and warding off evil spirits. I wasn't sure if I believed him, but something compelled me to buy one. I hung it on my rearview mirror, hoping it might offer some comfort or protection. A few weeks later, I decided to return to the fishing spot. I told myself I was being silly, that there was nothing to fear. But as I drove up to the river, the familiar sense of unease washed over me. The charm swung gently from the mirror, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. The morning was overcast, the sky a dull gray that matched my mood. As I set up my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The perfume smell returned, stronger than ever, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to focus on fishing, but my heart wasn't in it. After an hour, I decided to call it a day. As I packed up my gear, I felt a sudden urge to look behind me. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was a woman in a white dress. Her hair was dirty blonde, and she stared at me with hollow, vacant eyes. My blood ran cold, and I felt rooted to the spot. She raised her hand, as if to wave, but the motion was slow and deliberate, almost unnatural. I blinked, and she was gone. I've had my fair share of apartment tales over the years, but one story stands out vividly in my memory. It revolves around my grandmother, a woman with a knack for sensing things before they happen. A trait that both intrigued and occasionally unnerved me. Growing up, I often found myself listening to her recount eerie ghost stories passed down through generations. Despite her captivating narratives, I remained skeptical, dismissing them as nothing more than folklore meant to entertain. That all changed when we moved into my uncle's spacious apartment. It was a chilly winter in 1996 when we made the move. The apartment, located in a quaint corner of our city, seemed like an upgrade from our previous place. Little did I know, it harbored something beyond my comprehension. My grandmother, always bustling with energy despite her age, helped unpack her beloved yarn bags as soon as we settled in. Yet, amid the excitement of rearranging furniture and settling into our new space, something peculiar caught her attention. I remember her suddenly pausing, her expression shifting from cheerful to uneasy in an instant. "Is everything all right, Grandma?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. She hesitated, her gaze flickering around the room as if searching for unseen shadows. "There's something here," she finally muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that doesn't want us here." I chuckled nervously, brushing off her words with a hint of skepticism. "Oh, come on, Grandma," I teased, trying to lighten the mood. "It's a bit late for that now, isn't it?" Little did I realize then, my nonchalant dismissal would come back to haunt me, quite literally. The days passed uneventfully until one evening, just before Christmas. My mom was engrossed in her favorite holiday movie, It's a Wonderful Life, while I lounged on the couch, half watching the screen and half lost in my own thoughts. That's when it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting movement caught my attention. I glanced towards the kitchen doorway, dismissing it as fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But then it happened again. A shadowy figure darting across the doorway, swift and silent. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Could it be exhaustion? Or was there really something there? I forced myself to look away, trying to rationalize what I had just witnessed. Yet, each time I looked back, there it was, an indistinct silhouette lingering in the shadows of the kitchen doorway. It resembled a man, but devoid of any discernible features, as if cloaked in darkness itself. Fear crept over me like a shroud, but curiosity held me in its grip. I couldn't tear my eyes away, despite every instinct screaming at me to flee. "What did you see?" My brother's voice cut through the tense silence, startling me back to reality. I don't know," I stammered, torn between disbelief and a primal sense of dread. Determined to confront whatever lurked in the darkness, my brother ventured into the kitchen with our dog, an energetic mutt named Max who never backed down from a challenge. As they entered the dimly lit room, I held my breath, anticipating something. Max's reaction shattered the eerie calm. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat, a sound I had never heard him make before. Then, with a sharp yelp of pain, he bolted back into the living room, tail tucked between his legs, seeking refuge under the safety of our couch. My blood ran cold. Whatever lingered in that apartment was real, and it was not friendly. In the days that followed, unease settled over our once happy home like a thick fog. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night. Whispers carried on the wind, chilling me to the bone. Sleep became elusive, plagued by restless dreams and unexplained shadows dancing at the edge of my vision. We couldn't ignore it any longer. The atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, suffocating us with its silent malevolence. A week later, we made the decision to leave. Years passed, but the memory of that haunting experience lingered, etched into my mind like a scar. Driving by the apartment recently, I saw it undergoing renovations. A new beginning, perhaps, for the space that once held such darkness. I couldn't help but wonder, had anyone else felt its presence? Had the renovations stirred something dormant, or had the entity moved on, satisfied with its unsettling legacy? That night forever changed me. It shattered my skepticism and instilled a newfound respect for the mysteries that lurk beyond our understanding. Some things defy explanation, lingering on the fringes of our perception, waiting to be discovered, or perhaps waiting for us to acknowledge their existence. Back in the early 90s, my family lived in Dundale, a quaint village nestled somewhere in the heart of America. Our house sat across from an old church dating back to the 15th century, a relic of times past that added a touch of eerie charm to our neighborhood. Behind our rented house stretched a small plot where, centuries ago, criminals were said to be buried outside the consecrated grounds of the church cemetery. It was an L-shaped house, 2 stories tall, originally built in the 18th century as a butcher's residence. Despite its age, the house exuded a certain rustic charm that drew my parents to rent it. One thing about that house, though, whenever it rained, a musty sulfur-like smell would waft through the air, making our cozy abode feel a tad more mysterious than usual. One summer, while my parents were away on vacation, my no-nonsense atheist uncle, Jake, came to babysit my younger sister and me. I was 4 years old at the time, and my sister was just 3. One stormy night, after tucking us into bed, Uncle Jake retired to the guest room adjacent to the staircase leading to the upper wing where my sister and I slept. All was quiet until the early hours of the morning when he was roused from his sleep by faint creaking noises echoing from the upstairs hallway. Initially dismissing them, he soon heard the creaks grow louder, prompting him to investigate. Concerned that my sister or I might be awake and wandering, he tiptoed upstairs to check on us. To his relief, we were both sound asleep in our beds, undisturbed by whatever was causing the noise. Relieved but still curious, Uncle Jake returned downstairs to the guest room. However, the eerie creaking sounds persisted, now seemingly following him from the upstairs hallway. Annoyed by the disturbance, he decided to confront it head-on and ascended the stairs once more. As he climbed, the creaking turned into distinct footsteps, echoing ominously through the old house. The footsteps seemed to traverse the hallway, then suddenly took a sharp turn toward the staircase where Uncle Jake stood, frozen in disbelief. Leaning against the railing, he watched in stunned silence as the footsteps passed right by him, continuing down the stairs and fading into the living room. The living room, once the heart of the butcher's shop that had been added to the house in later years, held a massive fireplace that dominated one wall, a reminder of its historical past. The sudden presence of these spectral footsteps left Uncle Jake shaken to the core. In a panic, he flicked on every light switch within reach, flooding the house with light in an attempt to dispel the eerie ambience. For a few tense moments, everything was quiet again, the strange sounds mercifully absent. It was a relief, but also deeply unsettling. When my parents returned from their holiday, Uncle Jake wasted no time recounting his chilling experience. Concerned for our well-being and perhaps a bit unnerved themselves, they sought guidance from a local pastor who performed a blessing on the house. According to them, the paranormal disturbances ceased after that, leaving our household to return to its normal, albeit still slightly haunted, existence. Years later, as we reminisced about our time in Dundale, the story of Uncle Jake's encounter with the unexplained became a cherished family tale. Even though I've grown skeptical of the supernatural over the years, that night remains a vivid memory. It was June of this year when I, my friend Dexter, and my little sister, Lily, decided to take a long weekend camping trip to a popular state park a few hours away from our home. With summer just beginning, we were eager to escape the city and embrace the tranquility of nature. I meticulously planned a variety of fun activities for us, including hiking, fishing, and even a visit to a ghost town I had discovered on the map while preparing for the trip. The lack of information available about this ghost town on Google made it all the more intriguing, like a hidden gem waiting to be uncovered. We set off early on a bright Friday morning, our spirits high as we loaded our gear into the truck. The drive to the state park was picturesque, with rolling hills, dense forests, and the occasional glimmer of a distant lake. As we drove, the cityscape gradually gave way to rural tranquility, the concrete jungle replaced by vast expanses of greenery. The anticipation of adventure buzzed in the air, and we chatted excitedly about our plans for the weekend. We arrived at the park by mid-morning and quickly set up camp. The campground was nestled in a serene valley, surrounded by towering pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped merrily, and the distant sound of a flowing stream added to the idyllic atmosphere. Once our tents were pitched and the firewood gathered, we decided to embark on our first adventure, exploring the ghost town. I pulled out my map and GPS, eager to navigate the way to our mysterious destination. We piled back into the truck, our two dogs, a large chocolate Labrador named Max and a feisty Australian Shepherd named Daisy, eagerly hopping in with us. The dogs were as excited as we were, tails wagging and noses twitching at the promise of new scents and sights. The drive to the ghost town started on a well-paved two-lane road that wound its way up the mountain. The higher we climbed, the more the trees thickened, their branches forming a green canopy that blocked out the sun. The air grew cooler, and the scent of pine was intoxicating. We drove deeper and deeper into the wilderness, the road narrowing to a single lane, the signs of civilization becoming fewer and farther between. Dexter, usually the more cautious of us, began to express his concern. "Are you sure about this, Alex? We've got Lily with us, and we're heading into the middle of nowhere." I glanced at him, then back at the road. "I know it seems a bit sketchy, but that's what makes it an adventure. Besides, we're well prepared. We have our gear, the dogs, and we're both armed, just in case." Lily, always the curious one, chimed in from the back seat. "I think it's exciting. Who knows what we'll find there?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, and despite Dexter's reservations, we pressed on. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, its rough surface making the truck jostle and shake. The trees grew even denser, their trunks thick and gnarled, like silent sentinels guarding an ancient secret. The GPS indicated that we were getting close, but the journey seemed to stretch on forever. Just when our excitement began to wane, the gravel road ended at a stop sign. The trees suddenly parted, and the bright sunlight flooded in, illuminating the two-lane road ahead. We all breathed a sigh of relief. The GPS directed us to take the next right turn. As soon as we did, the road narrowed once more to a single lane of gravel, and we saw the ghost town ahead. The sight was both eerie and captivating. Weathered gray buildings, some standing tall and defiant, others crumbling and consumed by time. It felt like stepping back into another era, a place frozen in the past. We parked the truck at the edge of the town and got out, the dogs straining at their leashes, eager to explore. Max and Daisy immediately went on high alert, their ears perked and bodies tense. Daisy's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling from her throat. "Looks like the dog sensed something," Dexter remarked, his tone uneasy. I nodded, feeling a twinge of apprehension. Let's stick together and be cautious. We walked down the main road, the gravel crunching under our boots. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of an old building or the distant call of a bird. The town felt abandoned, yet there was an undeniable sense of being watched. One house stood out among the rest. It was newer, its paint less weathered, and it looked as though someone might still live there. The front door was open, and I thought I saw a flicker of movement inside. "Do you think someone lives there?" Lily asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I'm not sure," I replied, my eyes fixed on the house. "Maybe it's a caretaker or someone passing through." As we approached, the dogs grew more agitated. We walked past the house and a creepy, broken swing set, entering the heart of the ghost town. The buildings here were older, some standing tall while others had collapsed into piles of rubble. I snapped a few photos, but the feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at my nerves. Dexter, ever the adventurer, decided to get some shots of the interiors. "I'm going to check out the windows, see what's inside," he said, already moving toward one of the buildings. "I don't know, Dex," I hesitated. "Something doesn't feel right." "We've got our concealed carry permits and our guns," he reassured me, patting his side where his 1911.45 was holstered. "We'll be fine." Despite his confidence, a wave of uneasiness washed over me. I kept close to Lily, feeling an overwhelming urge to protect her. As Dexter climbed onto the porch of one of the buildings, Daisy let out a low, menacing growl, her eyes fixed on an upper window. "Okay, I'm done. Let's go," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. Dexter jogged back to us, and we started toward the truck. As we passed the newer house, I noticed the front door was now closed. Lily saw it too and pointed it out, just as Daisy went ballistic, barking and snarling, lunging toward the house with a fury I had never seen before. Max was on high alert, his eyes darting between the house and the town behind us. We quickly climbed into the truck, our hearts pounding. We decided to take a different route back, avoiding the narrow, perilous road we had come in on. The drive back was tense, the silence heavy with unspoken fears. That evening, after we had settled back at the campsite and tucked Lily into bed, Dexter and I sat by the fire, reviewing the photos from our ghost town adventure. The crackling of the fire was comforting, a stark contrast to the unsettling experience we had just endured. As Dexter flipped through the images on his phone, his expression changed from one of curiosity to one of horror. He zoomed in on one of the window shots, his hand trembling as he handed the phone to me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look," he said, his voice shaky. "In the window." I took the phone and looked at the photo. There, clearly visible in the reflection, were short, light gray creatures with large heads and black eyes. They had small nubs or button-like horns on their foreheads and the sides of their heads. One of them appeared to have wings, lined with similar nubs. A cold chill ran down my spine. My mind raced with questions. What were these creatures? How had we not seen them while we were there? And most terrifying of all, what might have happened if they had chosen to reveal themselves? Dexter and I sat in stunned silence, the weight of what we had seen sinking in. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on our faces. We both knew that this experience had changed us, leaving us with more questions than answers. "I wonder who was in that newer house," I mused aloud. Was it one of those creatures? Or maybe a human living among them? "Maybe it was someone who stumbled upon the town like we did," Dexter suggested. "Someone who didn't know what lurks in those buildings." As we sat there, contemplating the possibilities, We realized that we would never get the answers we sought. The ghost town had revealed its secrets to us, but it had also shown us the dangers of curiosity. We made a silent pact to never return to that place, to keep our experience to ourselves and warn others to stay away. Later that night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The images of those creatures haunted me, their large black eyes staring into my soul. I knew that this was an experience I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The next morning, we packed up our campsite and headed home, our spirits dampened by the previous day's events. The drive back was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. Lily, sensing the change in our demeanor, didn't ask about the ghost town, and we didn't volunteer any information. As we settled back into our routine, the memory of the ghost town slowly began to fade, but the fear and unease lingered. Every time I looked at the photos, I was reminded of the strange, otherworldly creatures we had encountered. I couldn't help but wonder if they were still there, watching and waiting for the next curious souls to wander into their domain. Months passed, and life returned to normal, but the ghost town remained a haunting presence in the back of my mind. I would occasionally dream about it, the eerie silence, the dilapidated buildings, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Each time, I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. One day, Dexter called me, his voice filled with excitement. "Alex, you won't believe this. I did some research on that ghost town. Apparently, it's been abandoned for decades, and there are numerous reports of strange sightings and unexplained phenomena there." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "So, we're not the only ones who've experienced something there?" "Not at all," Dexter replied. "There are stories of people seeing ghostly apparitions, hearing strange noises, and even encountering creatures similar to the ones we saw in the photos." The revelation both comforted and terrified me. It was reassuring to know that we weren't alone in our experience, but it also confirmed that the ghost town was a place of true mystery and danger. Dexter and I agreed to keep our findings to ourselves, not wanting to attract attention to the town and potentially put others at risk. The ghost town had left an indelible mark on our lives, and we wanted to ensure that no one else had to endure the same terror we had faced. As the years went by, the ghost town became a distant memory, a story we only shared with those closest to us. Growing up in a house that's over a century old gives you a different perspective on life. My parents still live there, in that sprawling old structure with its creaky floors and echoes of the past. A place that has witnessed more history than most of us could even fathom. The house itself is like a member of our family. Its personality is vibrant and distinct as any human's. My dad has spent his entire life in this house. It's almost as if the walls themselves are part of his being. When he was a kid, my grandparents decided the family needed more space and converted the attic into 2 additional bedrooms. This renovation wasn't just a matter of adding space. It was about creating a home within a home. The back bedroom, perched directly above the living room, became the realm where my sister and I spent our childhoods, our personal sanctuary and battleground as siblings often find. Living in such an old house, you get used to the odd noises, the wind rattling the windows or the house settling with a sigh during the quiet of the night. But there were sounds that didn't fit the usual script. Many times when I was alone in the living room, a sudden crash would thunder from upstairs, as if someone had dropped a stack of heavy books. I would bolt up the stairs, heart pounding, only to find our room exactly as we left it, not a single item out of place. I kept these incidents to myself for years, convinced no one would believe the oddities of an overly imaginative child. The truth came out one rainy evening during a family dinner. I finally shared my experiences, half expecting dismissive laughs. Instead, my confession was met with stunned silence followed by uneasy exchanges of looks between my mom and sister. They too had heard the same inexplicable noises and had kept silent for the same reasons. Knowing I wasn't alone in what I'd heard was both a relief and a deepening of the mystery enveloping our old home. The strangeness escalated when I turned 16. One afternoon, I was deeply engrossed in playing The Legend of Zelda in the alcove of my bedroom, my back to the door and my eyes fixed on the game. My setup faced the window, and during brief moments when the game screen would fade to black, the glass acted like a mirror. It was during one of these transitions that I saw him, a reflection of a man standing right behind me. Assuming it was my dad playing a prank, I whipped around, ready to catch him in the act. But there was no one there. Confusion morphed into unease as I repeatedly reset the console, trying to recapture the reflection, but there was nothing. Later, I described the incident to my dad. His initial reaction was skepticism until I described the man I'd seen. He went pale, the blood draining from his face as he listened. I had described his father, a man who had passed away long before I was born. After that conversation, my dad never spoke of it again, dismissing it as my imagination. But the certainty in his initial shock told me it was something more. By the time I was 17, I thought I had become accustomed to the peculiarities of our home. But one sweltering summer day, as I sat playing on the computer with the front door open to encourage a non-existent breeze, the door suddenly swung shut with force enough to make the old frame creak ominously. It latched with a sharp click, a sound peculiar because that old door had a stubborn latch that required a very specific technique to fasten. Paralyzed, I listened as footsteps approached, passing by me with the distinct sound of a woman humming a melody. There was no one there, and yet the sound moved through the house as if carried by an invisible presence. To this day, even though I'm grown and have moved away, visits to my childhood home are tinged with an apprehensive anticipation. Despite the warmth and love that fill its rooms, a part of me remains alert, half expecting to hear another unexplainable noise or see a fleeting reflection. I know there's nothing malicious in that house, yet the memories of those eerie encounters linger, a subtle reminder of the unseen layers of history and mystery that dwell within its walls. This story is only the beginning, a prelude to deeper dives into the enigmatic experiences that have marked my relationship with our old family home. As I recount these tales, I delve into not just the spooky and unexplained, but also the profound connection to a place that has shaped generations of my family. The story continues, each chapter peeling back another layer of the mystery enveloping this storied house. As I grew older, my relationship with the house deepened, much like revisiting a complex novel and discovering layers you missed the first time around. Each creak and whisper of the old structure seemed to speak directly to me, sometimes comforting, other times disconcerting. College took me away from that old house, but every return felt like stepping back into a living memory, the walls holding echoes of laughter, arguments, and the quiet moments that filled the days of my youth. The peculiar incidents, once sources of childhood terror, now intrigue me with their mysterious origins and elusive meanings. One winter break, I decided to delve into the history of our house and the land on which it stood. My curiosity was not just piqued by the incidents I'd experienced, but also by a growing sense of connection to the place that had nurtured my family for generations. I spent hours in the local library, poring over old land records, newspaper archives, and any tidbits that might illuminate the past. What I discovered added layers of intrigue and history to our home's already rich narrative. The land had once been part of a larger estate, owned by a prominent family whose fortunes had vanished into the mists of time. The estate was eventually parceled out, and the section where our house now stood was sold off in the early 1900s. The original structure burned down in a fire, and my great-grandparents had built the current house from its ashes. The story of resilience and renewal was inspiring, but it was a small, almost missed note in an old newspaper that caught my eye. A brief mention of the original family's daughter, known for her love of music and untimely death in the very same area our house occupied. Armed with this new knowledge, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a new way. Could the humming I'd heard be a lingering imprint of that young woman's presence? It was a thought that both thrilled and unnerved me. Determined to learn more, I visited the local historical society, where I found photographs of the original estate and its residents. The image of a young woman, poised at a piano with a serene yet melancholic expression, sent a shiver down my spine. There was an unmistakable air of familiarity about her, the same presence I had sensed during those unexplained occurrences. Returning home that night, I felt a different kind of energy in the house. It was as if my discovery had stirred something, or perhaps my newfound awareness had opened a channel of communication between the past and the present. That evening, as I lay in bed in the old back bedroom, the air seemed charged with anticipation. And then it happened. The soft sound of piano music filtered through the walls, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. But as I listened intently, there it was again, a delicate melody playing softly, as if from a great distance. The music didn't scare me. Instead, it filled me with a profound sense of peace. Here was a connection, a shared moment across time with the young woman who had once called my land home. My visits home became more frequent after that discovery. I would sometimes sit quietly in different rooms, hoping to catch the music again, or perhaps another sign from the past. More often than not, the house remained just a house, its sounds those of the mundane and explainable. But occasionally, just occasionally, there would be something. A whisper of fabric, a scent of old roses, or the faintest trace of a melody that reminded me the past was much closer than we might think. To this day, the house remains a place of mystery and history, its stories woven into the fabric of my family. The experiences I've shared are but a glimpse into the depth of connection one can have with a place. For me, the old house is not just a structure of wood and stone. It is a gateway to the past, a keeper of secrets, and a reminder that sometimes the line between the past and the present is thinner than we might ever imagine. As I continue to explore and understand this connection, I realize that my story is not just about a haunted house. It's about heritage, legacy, and the deep, sometimes mystical ties that bind us to our homes and our ancestors. This house, with all its quirks and whispers, is a treasure trove of untold stories, waiting for the curious and the brave to uncover and understand them. My journey with the house is far from over, and I look forward to each return, each opportunity to uncover more about this remarkable place that I am fortunate enough to call home. My life in the suburbs of Atlanta was relatively peaceful, a harmony punctuated only by the mundane. The occasional late bus, neighborhood barbecues, and the relentless Georgia heat. But recently, my quiet existence has been infiltrated by something inexplicable, something that sends shivers down my spine and makes my heart race with both fear and a morbid curiosity. It all started one late evening in my bedroom. a sanctuary where I usually felt safe and comfortable. I was sprawled out in my desk chair, mindlessly scrolling through videos online, trying to unwind after another long day at the office. That's when I first felt it, a warm puff of air against the back of my neck. Instantly, my skin crawled. I jerked around, half expecting to find my younger brother, Jake, playing a prank on me. He'd returned earlier that day from hanging out with his friends and was often up for a bit of mischief, but there was no one there. The room was still, my door shut just as I had left it when I entered. Confusion morphed into a creeping dread. There was no draft. The window was tightly sealed, and despite it being a warm southern night, a cold shiver ran through me. I tried to laugh it off, blaming my jitters on exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But sleep was restless that night, as I tossed and turned, unable to shake the unease. Nearly a week passed with the incident fading into the back of my mind, attributed to tiredness and forgotten amid the rush of daily life. That was until one quiet evening when I found myself alone again, sitting at the dining table. I was eating leftovers and watching some videos on my tablet. A prickling sensation crept up the back of my neck, subtle at first but growing more persistent. Absent-mindedly, I rubbed at it, trying to dispel the discomfort. After finishing my meal, I stood up to clear the table, but the sensation intensified, now feeling distinctly like a sharp, targeted prickle. Unease quickly turned into alarm. I hurried into the kitchen, trying to focus on the mundane task of washing up. Yet, as I turned to head upstairs, I felt it again. That unmistakable warm breath on my neck. My body froze. Fear rooted me to the spot, heart hammering against my ribs as I stood petrified at the foot of the stairs. Time seemed to stretch into eternity as I debated my next move. Run upstairs? Confront my invisible follower? But then, my phone rang, the sudden jingle breaking the tension. Adrenaline surged through me as I whipped around, phone in hand, only to be met once again by emptiness. There was no one there. I was utterly alone. With my heart still racing, I answered the phone. It was my friend Liz, asking about plans for the weekend. Her voice, cheerful and oblivious to my distress, grounded me, and I managed to make my way upstairs, pretending everything was normal. Since then, this presence has made itself known several more times, always when I'm alone. It's a pattern now, a chilling touch, a breath on my neck, and then nothing tangible to confirm its existence. I've shared these occurrences with my family, but their skepticism is palpable. They don't feel it. They don't understand. It's as if this entity has chosen me for reasons I can't fathom. But last night, something new happened. As I lay in bed, my Amazon Echo, which I use as a speaker for my TV due to its superior sound quality, suddenly disconnected. The TV displayed a message about a Bluetooth headset, which I don't even own. Confused, I fiddled with the settings, only to notice the Echo's unusual behavior. It was flashing green, a signal that something was not right. Drawing the speaker closer, I heard a voice, gruff and deep, indistinct yet unmistakably human, or so it seemed. It was too quiet to discern the words, but the very fact that it was a voice sent a new wave of dread through me. Was this technological glitch another manifestation of the presence in my home? Just as suddenly as it had begun, the Echo returned to normal, the blue light steady and the TV sound resuming. Whatever had hijacked my speaker had retreated as quickly as it had emerged. Now, I find myself fearing my own home, a place where I should feel secure and at peace. I try never to be alone, but it's not always possible. What haunts me the most is not knowing the intentions of this presence. Is it merely mischievous, Or is there something more sinister at play? Is it a ghost? Or something far darker, bound to the house with motives unknown? I've decided to try my best to ignore it. They say such beings thrive on fear, and I refuse to feed whatever it is with my own. But as I sit here, recounting these incidents, I can't help but feel the familiar prickle on my neck, a reminder that I am never truly alone. And so, with a wary eye and a guarded heart, I prepare to live alongside my unseen guest, whatever it may be. As the days turned into weeks, my life started to feel more like a suspense thriller than reality. The sporadic encounters with the unseen presence in my home continued, each one leaving me more unsettled than the last. I struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy, but the tension of waiting for the next encounter wore on me, fraying my nerves. One particularly quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, I was in the living room trying to lose myself in a book. The tranquility was deceptive. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside became a signal of the unseen. As darkness fell, the air around me grew inexplicably colder, a familiar prickle teasing the back of my neck. I tensed, anticipating the now familiar sensation of being watched. Refusing to give in to the fear, I spoke aloud, my voice steady but loud enough to cut through the silence. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The words hung in the air, bold and a bit reckless. Silence was the only reply, stretching out so long that I began to feel foolish. Had my mind conjured up the entire thing? But then, the temperature dropped sharply, and the faint smell of tobacco filled the room. A smell that had no place in my non-smoking home. The atmosphere thickened, charged with an unspoken energy. I stood up, my resolve hardening. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. Suddenly, the television flickered on, the screen a static mess before settling on a clear image. What appeared next was startling. An old black and white photograph of a man in military uniform displayed on the screen. His expression was stern, yet there was a sadness in his eyes that felt all too familiar. As I stared, transfixed, the television switched off by itself, plunging the room back into silence. That night, I couldn't sleep, the image of the man haunting my thoughts. The next morning, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I went to the local library. I spent hours poring over old military records and historical documents from our area. Finally, in a dusty ledger from the early 20th century, I found him. His name was George Mallory, a soldier who had died in World War I. The record was sparse, but one line stood out: survived by no immediate family. Last residence on Oakwood Lane. A shiver ran through me. That was the old name of my street. Armed with this information, I returned home, my mission clear. Standing in the middle of the living room, I addressed George directly. "George, I know who you are now. I don't know why you're here, but I want to help you find peace." The atmosphere shifted, the air suddenly heavy with emotion. I felt a hand, light and cold, touch my shoulder briefly, more comforting than frightening. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance. Over the next few days, I spoke to George often, telling him about the world he had left behind, how times had changed. Slowly, the strange occurrences began to diminish. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, the house unusually warm and quiet, I felt a final whisper of air across my neck, softer this time, like a sigh. When I turned around, nothing was there, but the room felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had been released. The days that followed were serene. The chilling sensations ceased, and the eerie occurrences stopped altogether. It seemed George had moved on, perhaps comforted by the recognition of his existence and the sharing of his story. In the end, what had started as a haunting evolved into an unlikely closure for a soul lost in time. While my home felt peaceful once again, the experience left me changed, more open to the mysteries that linger just beyond the veil of our understanding, and more compassionate towards the spirits that might still wander among us, unseen but no less real. As for me, I continue to live in my house, now with a sense of peace. Occasionally, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a glimpse of George or feel his presence. But there's only silence, a comforting, respectful silence that feels like a final goodbye. And in this quiet, I found not only peace but also a profound connection to the history of my home, a reminder of the layers of life that have passed through its rooms, each leaving behind echoes of their existence.